In this video, we'll discuss the atheistic existential philosophy of Friedrich Nietzsche. We've been working up to Nietzsche and Nietzsche's philosophy for a while now. And at least to start, take a look at the variety of texts for which Nietzsche is responsible. Starting out in 1878 with Human All Too Human, The Gay Science, sometimes translated as The Joyful Wisdom or Happy Knowledge, that we'll be discussing momentarily. Thus Spake Zarathustra, that we've prepared for in our discussions of Zoroastrianism and Diogenes, the ancient Greek cynic. Beyond Good and Evil, which we didn't touch upon. The Genealogy of Morality, which we discussed in our discussion of Aristotle and his Nicomachean Ethics, and those that finish out his career, Twilight of the Idols and the Antichrist. To put it simply, the argument of the Antichrist is that the way to be a good person is to be the opposite of what Jesus represents. It's a stunning philosophy, wildly controversial, and certainly not one that's broadly appealing. Let's take a look at where his philosophy comes from, where it goes, and in that pursuit, hopefully, we can discover why he helps, or how he helps, make the modern world what it is, and understand how Nietzsche serves as a turning point, a pivot in the history of ideas, that everything leading up to him led up to that moment, and everything after the 1880s until now, a scant 130 years later, is a response to his philosophy. To put it simply, as we'll see, what Nietzsche does is makes it possible to argue that there's no such thing as God. The Western world had been preparing and preparing and preparing for that argument for hundreds of years on end. And Nietzsche finally comes out and says, perhaps what everybody had been thinking. He gives a sort of emperor with no clothes. Everybody knows there's no God. Nietzsche comes out and says it. Or at least that's the idea that Nietzsche seems to have in mind. Now, whether it's true or not is a debate to follow him. It's been a debate the entire time through. But once Nietzsche does publish that there are no such thing as gods in The Gay Science in the 1880s, he opens the floodgates for many philosophers to follow where he's shown the path. And philosophy after Nietzsche takes Nietzsche's atheism in large, very large part, as a starting point. Let's get into the texts themselves. I suggest we start with the text of the madman. I'll just jump right in, and we'll see what's going on here. Nietzsche writes, "Have you not heard of that madman who lit a lantern in the bright morning hours, ran to the marketplace and cried incessantly, 'I seek God, I seek God'? As many of those who did not believe in God were standing around just then, he provoked much laughter." "Has he gotten lost?" asked one. "Did he lose his way like a child?" asked another. "Or is he hiding? Is he afraid of us? Has he gone on a voyage or immigrated?" Thus they yelled and laughed. The madman jumped into their midst and pierced them with his eyes. "Whither is God?" he cried. "I will tell you. We have killed him, you and I. All of us are his murderers. But how did we do this? How could we drink up the sea? Who gave us the sponge to wipe away the entire horizon? What were we doing when we unchained this earth from its sun? Whither is it moving now? Whither are we moving? away from all suns? Are we not plunging continually, backward, sideward, forward, in all directions? Is there still any up or down? Are we not straying as through an infinite nothing? Do we not feel the breath of empty space? Has it not become colder? Is not night continually closing in on us? Do we not need to light lanterns in the morning? Do we hear nothing as yet of the noise of the gravediggers who are burying God? Do we smell nothing as yet of the divine decomposition? Some translations translate that as the divine putrefaction, as in, whew, that stinks. And he's beginning to stink up the place. We should get him out of here. Gods, too, decompose. God is dead. God remains dead. And we have killed him. How shall we comfort ourselves, the murderers of all murderers? What was holiest and mightiest of all that the world has yet owned has bled to death under our knives. Who will wipe this blood off of us? What water is there for us to clean ourselves? What festivals of atonement, what sacred games shall we have to invent? Is not the greatness of this deed too great for us? Must we ourselves not become gods simply to appear worthy of it? There has never been a greater deed, and whoever is born after us for the sake of this deed, he will belong to a higher history than all history hitherto. Here the madman fell silent and looked again at his listeners, and they too were silent and stared at him in astonishment. At last he threw his lantern on the ground, and it broke into pieces and went out. "I have come too early," he said then. "My time is not yet. This tremendous event is still on its way, still wandering. It has not yet reached the ears of men. Lightning and thunder require time. The light of the stars requires time. Deeds, though done, still require time to be seen and heard. This deed is still more distant from them than the most distant stars, and yet they have done it themselves." It has been related further that on the same day the madman forced his way into several churches, and there struck up his Requiem Aeternam Deo. That's the eternal funeral song of God, or the funeral song of the eternal God. Led out and called to account, he is said always to have replied nothing but, "What, after all, are these churches now, if they are not the tombs and sepulchres of God?" A sepulchre is a coffin. There are a number of ways to understand this, and a number of things to understand in it. Let's work our way from the back to the front. When Nietzsche calls churches tombs and coffins, what he means is that there's nothing alive in there. And we could further claim that everyone knows it, that nobody is laboring under the assumption that there's really a living God, that the people in there are as dead in soul as the God Nietzsche suggests is dead, and that people can try to act like they're happy, joyful, and there's a happiness about a living God, but it's an emperor with no clothes. There's nothing going on there, and people are fooling themselves. Now, you certainly do not have to agree with Nietzsche. And Nietzsche's style is not an easy pill to swallow. He's blunt. He turns out to be rude, mean, and his language alone is tough enough to stomach. The implications are infuriating, I would assume, to the fervent religious believer. In some parts of the world, I know, for example, in places like North Africa, carrying a copy of the Gay Science, or Thus Spake Zarathustra, could merit you a death sentence. These are not ideas that people take kindly to. Notice that Socrates was executed for questioning the traditional religious belief of his society. In point of fact, the only reason Nietzsche can publish what he publishes is that 50 years earlier, the Inquisition had stopped burning people alive for exactly these ideas. Nietzsche publishes these things and isn't killed for it. But the ideas are dangerous because they claim to expose religion for a fraud. The absolute difficult question is he right? I don't think there could be any more difficult a question to deal with than that. When Nietzsche says, "We have killed God," what he does not mean is that there was once a living God, and somehow we climbed up to the heavens and put a knife in his back. No, instead, that's metaphor. What Nietzsche means is that there was never a God. And just recently, we've done away with the idea of God. Some of the relevant contexts not to overlook is that just 20 or 30 years earlier, Charles Darwin had published The Origin of Species, which makes a claim that you don't need God to explain why people are here. Evolution, a natural process, suffices. The supernatural explanation is no longer necessary. Nietzsche takes those ideas floating around in the intellectual milieu of the time, and he can see the writing on the wall. The death bell for the time in which religion held the most sway is already tolling. And Nietzsche says, let's be done with it. Give up the ghost. These ideas are further elaborated in Thus Spake Zarathustra. Let's see them there and understand just how far this goes. Let's start here. We see in what we're skipping over the exact same claim of the Gay Science, that God is dead. Meaning not there was once a living God and now there's not, but instead that all religion is fraudulent. A profound and profoundly controversial claim, but one that characterizes the coming 20th century. That the possibility is now open to disbelieve in a way that, especially under the context of the Inquisition, one could not hold those positions and live. Let's see where Nietzsche picks up. This is part 3 of the prologue. It says, when Zarathustra arrived at the nearest town which adjoineth the forest, he found many people assembled in the marketplace. For it had been announced that a rope dancer would give a performance. And there Zarathustra spake thus unto the people. The rope dancer, who's going to be an important theme going forward, is a tightrope walker. We'll see the symbolism Nietzsche attaches to that image. Zarathustra says, I teach you the Superman. In German, this is Übermensch. U-B-E-R-M-E-N-S-C-H. Übermensch. This could be translated as the overman, the above man, the beyond man, the transcending of man, or the surpassing of man. Nietzsche continues that man is something to be surpassed, and asks, what have you done to surpass, to go beyond what it has meant to be a human? As we'll see going forward, what he means by that is that the human now is a religious being. The human to come will be post-religion. Humanity after religion no longer holds sway. All beings hitherto have created something beyond themselves, and you want to be the ebb of that great tide, and would rather go back to beast than surpass man. Look at the evolutionary themes we see as we continue. What is the ape to man? A laughingstock, a thing of shame. And just the same shall man be to Superman, a laughingstock, a thing of shame. What I said previously was that Nietzsche is mean, blunt, and rude. His words alone are rude enough. The implication is disturbing, unsettling. His claim is that in the future, at a time when religion no longer holds sway, people will look back at the religious epoch of mankind with derision and laughter, as if to say, you believed that? What a joke. It's not nice. Nietzsche's style has been described as polemical. That word, which you see here, I would suggest could be defined as using language and words in order to stir up a fight. And that is what Nietzsche appears to be doing, using language and words to stir up a fight. He's not playing nice or being gentle with religion. For which we could ask the question, should he be? Does he have to be? He continues on. You have made your way from worm to man, and much within you is still worm. Once were you apes, and yet man is even more of an ape than any of the apes. Even the wisest among you is only a disharmony and hybrid of plant and phantom. But do I bid you become plants or phantoms? Lo, I teach you the Superman. The Superman is the meaning of the earth. Let your will say, the Superman shall be the meaning of the earth. I conjure you, my brethren, remain true to the earth, and believe not those who speak unto you of super-earthly hopes. Poisoners are they, whether they know it or not. Despisers of life are they, decaying ones and poisoned ones themselves, of whom the earth is weary, so away with them. Once blasphemy against God was the greatest blasphemy. But God died, and therewith also those blasphemers. To blaspheme the earth is now the dreadfulest sin, and to rate the heart of the unknowable higher than the meaning of the earth. Once the soul looked contemptuously upon the body, and then that contempt was the supreme thing. The soul wished the body meager, ghastly, and famished. Thus it thought to escape from the body and the earth. Oh, but that soul itself was meager, ghastly, and famished, and cruelty was the delight of that soul. But you also, my brethren, tell me, what does your body say about your soul? Is your soul not poverty, and pollution, and wretched self-complacency? Verily, a polluted stream is man. One must be a sea to receive a polluted stream without becoming impure. Lo, I teach you the Superman. He is that sea. In him can your great contempt be submerged. Understand Nietzsche's claim that the Superman is the meaning of the earth. This is forward-looking. His hope is that humanity, after the time of religion, will become the meaning of life. And that we shouldn't believe those who try and draw us in with hopes of unattainable heavens, invisible heavens. Nietzsche's complaint is that when people live their entire lives waiting for an afterlife that he thinks won't ultimately come, then in various ways it's a poison, that it's destructive to the purpose of life, which is to enjoy the only one life we have, to get the most out of it, not spend it waiting for a death. That the meaning of life is not our death. The meaning of life is our life. But furthermore, that these poisonous hopes of afterlives not only destroy our appreciation of this life, making us think this life is actually evil, but furthermore, it turns this life evil. Think, if you can imagine, what rating the heart of the unknowable higher than the meaning of the earth could refer to. What sort of people think that the heart of the unknowable, which means a God, an unknowable God, is more important than living human beings? I would suggest that there are such people that we are completely aware of. I would suggest that the most relevant example would be religiously inspired mass terrorism. People who think that God is more important than humans, the meaning of the earth. But the exact same might, in fact, be true of the person who thinks that since abortion is so immoral, it's better that God's will be done and women die in childbirth than have the option to abort their babies. That's to rate God as more important than humans. Nietzsche wants to invert that, to do away with these invisible gods that everyone's so caught up with, and go back to being human as the point. When Nietzsche says that the Superman is the sea in which your great contempt can be submerged, and that a polluted stream is man. What he's expressing is that for the religious person, life has about as much depth as a trickling stream. And he wants to recover the depth of meaning like an ocean that humanity is inheritor to. And that you can hate with every fiber of your being the philosophy that Nietzsche is expressing, that we should do away with religion for the betterment of mankind. But for him, it's like nothing but dirt off his shoulder. He brushes it off. It doesn't bother him that you hate this idea, that anyone hates this idea. You can put all that hate on him, and it doesn't bother him a whit, because he has a depth of spirit. And his argument is that those who are religious don't. They're shallow. It's a convoluted claim, a counterintuitive claim, and certainly not a claim easy to agree with. But that is what he's literally arguing, and philosophy is never the same after it. So, whether you agree with him or not, like him or not, at the very least, understand the influence of these ideas. That will suffice for our purposes. I'll just pick up a couple things here, and we'll start to finish this out. Nietzsche has his character Zarathustra describe man as a rope stretched between the animal and the Superman, a rope over an abyss, a dangerous crossing, a dangerous wayfaring, a dangerous looking back, a dangerous trembling and halting. What is great in man is that he is a bridge and not a goal. What is lovable in him is that he has an overgoing and a downgoing. I'll leave you to parse those meanings, but we'll see similar themes as we go forward. We will pick up at the part that has to do with the tightrope walker. Let's begin. He continues, "Then, however, something happened which made every mouth mute and every eye fixed. In the meantime, of course, the rope dancer, or tightrope walker, had commenced his performance. He had come out of a little door and was going along the rope which was stretched between the two towers, so that it hung above the marketplace and the people. When he was just midway across, the little door opened once more, and a gaudily dressed fellow like a buffoon sprang out, and went rapidly after the first one. You could think of this character as being like a jester. I like to imagine him riding a unicycle along the tightrope, coming up behind the first one, who's trying to keep his balance midway between the towers. The jester cries out, 'Go on, halt foot! Go on, lazy bones, interloper, sallow face, lest I tickle thee with my heel. What are you doing here between the towers? In the towers the place for thee. Thou shouldest be locked up. To one better than thyself thou blockest the way.'" Some translations render that into English as, "Make way for one who is better than you." Of course, the first tightrope walker trying to stay on the straight and narrow, not to lean to one side or the other and fall to temptation, is representative of the religious human. And this jester character is representative of the Superman, coming up and saying, "Get out of my way, you're holding me back." To make it explicitly clear, this is by implication Nietzsche's philosophy, that religion is a stumbling block, and the sooner it's out of the way, the sooner we can all progress. It's not a nice claim, but it is his claim, and it is influential. With every word, the jester came nearer and nearer the first one. When, however, he was but a step behind, there happened the frightful thing which made every mouth mute and every eye fixed. He uttered a yell like a devil and jumped over the other who was in his way. The latter, however, when he thus saw his rival triumph, lost at the same time his head and his footing on the rope. He threw his pole away and shot downwards faster than it, like an eddy of arms and legs into the depth. The marketplace and the people were like the sea when the storm cometh on. They all flew apart and in disorder, especially where the body was about to fall. Zarathustra, however, remained standing, and just beside him fell the body, badly injured and disfigured, but not yet dead. After a while, consciousness returned to the shattered man, and he saw Zarathustra kneeling beside him. "What art thou doing here?" he said at last. "I knew long ago that the devil would trip me up. Now he draggeth me down to hell. Wilt thou prevent him?" "On my honor, my friend," answered Zarathustra, "there is nothing of all that whereof thou speakest. There is no devil and no hell. Thy soul will be dead even sooner than thy body. Fear, therefore, nothing any more." The man looked up distrustfully. "If thou speakest the truth," said he, "I lose nothing when I lose my life. I am not much more than an animal which hath been taught to dance by blows and scanty fare." "Not at all," said Zarathustra. "Thou hast made danger thy calling. Therein there is nothing contemptible. Now thou perishest by thy calling. Therefore will I bury thee with mine own hands." When Zarathustra had said this, the dying one did not reply further, but he moved his hand as if he sought the hand of Zarathustra in gratitude, as if to say, "Thank you for telling me I don't have to be afraid anymore." Sometimes we say of art and artistic constructions that we from time to time are better able to tell the truth through fiction. When Nietzsche, as Zarathustra say to the dying tightrope walker, "There is no devil and no hell. Fear nothing," he has transcended the literary and spoken what he believes is literal, that literally there is no such thing as devils and hells, and all the rest. So let's all go back to living our lives. We don't need to live in fear, cowering for punishment and judgment in the afterlife. We can enjoy ourselves. This claim has a number of consequences going forward, and they're troubling too. The Russian novelist Fyodor Dostoevsky puts it in the following way, that if God is dead, then everything is permitted. And this is a relevant, appropriate question. If people don't think there's punishment in a hell, won't they try and get away with anything? Murder, rape, and pillage. And it is a concern. However, Plato's concerns, Socrates's, were that Religion didn't even teach especially worthwhile morals in the first place. To discriminate against gay people. Or to think that everybody else on earth was going to hell for having the wrong religion. Those things might not end up being especially moral. And to make a long story short, when we look at the evidence of the societies on planet Earth today, there is a very real statistical correlation between the less religious a society is, and the more peaceful it is, and the more religious a society is, and the more violent it is. I'm perfectly aware how counterintuitive that is. But it does hold up. It's now in question. Nietzsche makes it possible to question. Would the world be better without religion? It's troubling, especially if you honestly engage it. Does religion make the world a better place? Our unexamined presupposition, our assumption, is likely yes, it does. But that assumption can be criticized. Not to say that there aren't counter-arguments to the counter-arguments. But now these questions are open for the asking, open for discussion. And that's new in the history of culture and the history of ideas. I'm going to skip forward to the first true chapter, and we'll end our discussion with it. These are called the Three Metamorphoses. He says, "Three metamorphoses of the spirit do I designate to you. How the spirit becometh a camel, the camel a lion, and the lion at last a child. Many heavy things are there for the spirit, the strong load-bearing spirit, in which reverence dwelleth. For the heavy and the heaviest longeth its strength. What is heavy? So asketh the load-bearing spirit. Then kneeleth it down like the camel, and wanteth to be well laden. What is the heaviest thing, ye heroes, asketh the load-bearing spirit, that I may take it upon me and rejoice in my strength." I'm going to skip forward because Nietzsche has a tendency to ramble. But where we pick up, the same themes are continuing. All these heaviest things the load-bearing spirit taketh upon itself, and like the camel, which, when well laden, hasteneth into the wilderness, so hasteneth the spirit into its wilderness. But in the loneliest wilderness happeneth the second metamorphosis. Here the spirit becometh a lion. Freedom will it capture, and lordship in its own wilderness. Let's pause and consider the meaning or symbolism of the camel. To put it simply, for Nietzsche, in this part, the camel is representative of traditional religion and Christianity specifically. Why? A number of reasons. The camel is a beast of burden, led about by its master, a domesticated animal, all of which is symbolically relevant for Nietzsche in characterizing Christianity and traditional religion as a whole. It's also a beast of burden. And for Nietzsche, Christianity is a heavy baggage to have to lug around. The baggage of guilt, the baggage of sin, the baggage of tradition that weighs us down until we can barely move. And there are other images. When the camel sits down or stands up, it's kneeling and standing, as if the Catholic behind the pew, kneeling and rising and kneeling and rising. And there are religious allusions as well. For example, the verse in the New Testament in which Jesus says, It is easier for a camel to pass through the eye of the needle than for a rich man to go into heaven. All of which Nietzsche is intentionally drawing upon to characterize Christianity as a heavy burden that enslaved animals have to bear. The second metamorphosis is when we leave behind religion and capture the courage, the pride, the power, and the violence to slay God and destroy religious belief. Let's see how that occurs. Its last lord it here seeketh, hostile will it be to him, and to its last god. For victory will it struggle with the great dragon. What is the great dragon which the spirit is no longer inclined to call Lord and God? Thou shalt is the great dragon called. But the spirit of the lion saith, I will. Thou shalt lieth in its path, sparkling with gold, a scale-covered beast, and on every scale glittereth golden, thou shalt. The values of 1,000 years glitter on those scales, and thus speaketh the mightiest of all dragons. All the values of things glitter on me. All values have already been created, and all created values do I represent. Verily, there shall be no more I will any more. Thus speaketh the dragon. My brethren, wherefore is the need of the lion in spirit? Why sufficeth not the beast of burden, which renounceth and is reverent? To create new values that even the lion cannot yet accomplish. But to create itself freedom for new creating, that can the might of the lion do. To create itself freedom, and give a holy no, even unto duty. For that, my brethren, there is need of the lion. To assume the right to new values, that is the most formidable assumption for a load-bearing spirit. Verily, unto such a spirit it is praying and the work of a beast of prey. As its holiest, it once loved thou shalt. Now is it forced to find illusion and arbitrariness even in the holiest things, that it may capture freedom from its love. The lion is needed for this capture. Let's understand the symbolism of this dragon. The dragon named Thou Shalt is representative of religion and traditional religion. It's immense, awesome, terrifying to behold, implacable, beautiful and frightful at the same time. And on every scale of its golden body is an individual value, a thou shalt. Values like thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not have any gods before thy God, thou shalt not be gay, thou shalt not get an abortion, thou shalt not smoke pot. All the various rules are embodied in this terrifying, powerful creature, which is representative for God and religion. All these things you're not supposed to do. And Nietzsche's image is that the lion can go up to religion, can go up to God, and tear its jugular out. And when we've ceased to become reverent beasts of burden, thrown off the baggage of tradition, and assumed the predatory nature and pride to slay religion, then all those golden thou shalt not scales go clattering to the floor. And then the last metamorphosis can happen. But tell me, my brethren, what the child can do, which even the lion could not do. Why hath the praying lion still to become a child? Innocence is the child, and forgetfulness, a new beginning, a game, a self-rolling wheel, a first movement, a holy yes. Aye, for the game of creating, my brethren, there is needed a holy yes unto life. Its own will willeth now the Spirit. His own world winneth the world's outcast. 3 metamorphoses of spirit have I designated to you, how the spirit became a camel, the camel a lion, and the lion at last a child. Once we've thrown off the baggage of kneeling down to these gods, once we've slain them, put them to rest once and for all, then we can start fresh. The child is representative of innocence, playfulness, creativity, inventiveness. And once those scales with all those values are laying out on the floor, the child can pick them up like stacking blocks. And we can take "thou shalt not kill" and keep it, because it's good, it's worthwhile. We can keep "thou shalt not kill," steal. It's worthwhile. It continues to serve good purposes. But "thou shalt have no other gods before thy God," perhaps we can at last discard that value. "Thou shalt not be gay," that's a thing for an earlier time. Let's no longer incorporate that into what we find valuable. Or "thou shalt not have an abortion," even "thou shalt not smoke pot." We can choose what to include. The implication for Nietzsche is that if there was never a real God in the first place, it was humans who invented religion in the beginning. These are human creations, human choices, human values. It was humans who stoned the gays. It was humans who said, "My God is better than yours." It was humans who said, "Be fruitful and multiply." And so, if it was people who invented religious morality in the first place, with all the benefits and all the negatives that come with it, then we can invent them again. If religion has outlived its usefulness, we can recreate it as we see fit. Now, that comes with danger. What if we create bad morality? That's a real concern, and something that people after Nietzsche will have to wrestle with. If we aren't going to take religion as our standard for values, what will we take? Let's not suppose, either as a straw man, a hasty generalization, an over-exaggeration, or a straw man fallacy, or a slippery slope fallacy, that if we do away with religion, society will crumble. Not only does experience prove that that's not the case, but furthermore, it doesn't necessitate that everything becomes no holds barred. There are some things we could likely do away with in religion that no longer serve the purpose. I've made them clear. Discrimination against homosexuality, our society is already open to. And the reason why is that Nietzsche made this possible. He said, to use a similar metaphor, the emperor has no clothes. There is no God out there keeping track of these things. So let's stop pretending and all grow up and acknowledge what we all have known all along, that this is all fake, and that we don't have to be discriminatory against homosexuals. There's no basis for it. Now, again, you don't have to agree with Nietzsche, but these are the implications of the idea. Likely, without Nietzsche, there's no reason to even bother with gay marriage. Our society is evolving, and Nietzsche helps explain and make possible that evolution? Now the question is for better or worse, and that's a legitimate question. You have every right to ask it. Let me finish up with two things. One of the concepts that's implicit here is what's called the will to power. Nietzsche's ethic is built upon this will to power. That instead of saying no to everything in life, which is what religion asks, we say no to God and yes to life. Yes to fun. Yes to temptation. Yes to pleasure. Yes to the enjoyment of the various pleasures of this life. That instead of exercising willpower, where we deny ourselves the funs of this life, we desire what we want. We will for our own desires to hold sway. We will to become powerful ourselves. How would this be expressed? Through a variety of things. Take, for example, pre- or extramarital sex. Now, our society is wide open to premarital sex. And it's partly a result of technological progression of contraceptives. Sex has been decoupled from procreation, and the moral imperative to not have sex until marriage doesn't come with the same consequence of children out of wedlock. Take, for example, on a similar score, abortion. Abortion is saying, I choose, I will what I want out of my life. And if having a baby right now doesn't fit into it, then I choose to deny that. Now, from the religious perspective, there's a desire to not give in to that easy, pleasurable temptation, to get what we want out of life. That's deemed bad, immoral, evil. But Nietzsche's philosophy is that we are the ones who make the decision, and that's not only fine, it's good. Or take, for example, the legalization of marijuana across the country. No longer do we have to sit back and say the body is a temple, we have to have prohibition. Instead, we can say, you know what, let's have some fun. And that comes with dangers. How far do we take it? You can give counter-arguments, but let's not be confused about a slippery slope, because it doesn't necessarily lead to the crumbling of Western civilization. But I won't unpack all that right now. If you want to discuss it further, I think we can. Let me finish this way. There is some connection between Friedrich Nietzsche and Germany's later Nazism under Hitler. The connection is that copies of Thus Spake Zarathustra were handed out to the Nazi foot soldiers. It's as dark as it comes. But Nietzsche dies in the late 1880s. Hitler comes to power nearly a half a century later, in the 1830s. And Nietzsche's philosophy is appropriated and misinterpreted in horrific, atrocious ways. Nietzsche hates religion passionately because he thinks it's destructive to human psychology, human life, and the progress of civilization. You can debate that as you see fit. But Nietzsche doesn't hate religious people. Nietzsche doesn't hate the Jews like the Nazis hate the Jews, like Hitler does. Hitler's able to bend Nietzsche's philosophy of the will to power and disgust of religion into a horrific Holocaust. I would put it this way. Nietzsche's philosophy is used after his death for horrific purposes. Where does that blame lie? Is it with Nietzsche for opening the door to whatever we want? Perhaps. You're willing, you're within your rights to make that argument. I don't think the argument ultimately works, but I won't unpack everything on it right now. Is it Nietzsche's fault because his texts are poetic, metaphorical, mythological, instead of clear and dry, boring? I don't think that is a legitimate blame to place on him either. But lastly, while Nietzsche does upend religious belief, he upends the entirety of it. And it's probably not accurate nor appropriate to place the blame for the Nazi Holocaust on someone who had died 50 years prior to its occurrence. You can, but the argument doesn't hold a ton of water. It's got some big holes in it. Not least of which is that there's nothing advocating violence in Nietzsche's philosophy. His idea is to destroy religion, not destroy religious people. His idea is to destroy religion for the benefit of religious people. What Hitler does is he uses Christian hatred of Jewishness because the Jews don't believe in Jesus. They're stubborn. They refuse to just believe what everybody else believes. Scapegoats the Jews, a vulnerable minority community that's different, and says they're the cause of all of our society's problems. Co-opts Nietzsche, his will to power, and his hatred of religion for eugenic purposes. Eugenic purposes that had been pioneered in large part by Americans in the early part of the 20th century. Simply, the horrors of the Holocaust in the 20th century don't fit neatly at Nietzsche's feet. You can put some small bit of it there, but in large part, there's a large Christian prejudice against Judaism at that time. That's also should not be overlooked. Germany at the time of the Holocaust was 90% Christian. And if nothing else, what that should indicate is that being a religious society doesn't necessarily offer protection against horror, genocide. Those are tough things, and Nietzsche's tough on a number of scores to deal with. But I think we have dealt with him now. And so, I'm going to leave off so we can pick up and go from here.